My drunk wife confessed she hasn't desired me in years, so I secretly planned my escape from our loveless marriage and finally took my own life back. We were at a friend's party, the kind of gathering where people drank a little too much, the music played a little too loud, and conversations teetered on the edge of oversharing. My wife had been nursing her wine all evening, first glass, then a second, then a third. I had seen her tipsy before, but that night something felt different. She was looser, more talkative, and the filter that usually kept her biting remarks to herself had all but disappeared. We were sitting in the corner of the living room when it happened. She leaned in close, slurring her words just enough to make it clear she had had one too many. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes unfocused, but her voice carried a sharpness that sliced through the noise around us. "You know," she began, almost casually, "I haven't desired you in years." I blinked, unsure if I had heard her right. Maybe it was the music or the alcohol dulling my hearing. But no, she was looking right at me, her expression a strange mix of amusement and apathy. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the thumping bass. She laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, come on, don't act surprised. You felt it too, haven't you? We're just stuck." The room seemed to tilt. I wanted to chalk it up to her being drunk, to words she would regret in the morning. But there was a conviction in her tone that I could not ignore. This was not a fleeting thought or a drunken exaggeration. It was the truth, stripped bare and shoved in my face. For a moment I sat frozen, unsure how to respond. The party buzzed on around us, oblivious to the quiet implosion happening in the corner. My heart pounded in my chest, and a million thoughts raced through my mind. Had she been unhappy this whole time? How long had this been brewing? But instead of answers, I felt only a hollow ache, like someone had reached inside me and pulled out something vital. I looked at her again, hoping for some sign of regret, maybe a nervous laugh or an apology. Instead, she took another sip of her wine, looking almost relieved, as if saying it out loud had lifted a weight off her shoulders. "You don't mean that," I said finally, my voice cracking. She shrugged. "I don't know why you're so shocked. It's not like we've been passionate. I'm just being honest. Honest." That word rattled around in my head, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. Honesty was supposed to bring clarity, not this gut-wrenching sense of betrayal. I tried to piece together how we had gotten here, to this point where the woman I had shared a life with could admit something so devastating so casually. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I remember her mingling with the other guests as if nothing had happened, her laughter ringing out across the room. Meanwhile, I sat there replaying her words over and over, trying to make sense of them. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but what good would it do? She had said her piece, and no amount of arguing could take it back. On the drive home, she was quiet, staring out the window as if the conversation had never happened. I kept my hands gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white, afraid that if I let go I might snap. The silence between us was deafening, each second stretching longer than the last. When we got home, she went straight to bed without another word. I stayed in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen, my thoughts spiraling. Her words had cracked something inside me, something I was not sure could be fixed. That night, for the first time, I began to see our marriage for what it really was, not a partnership, but a trap. And I was not sure if I could, or should, find a way out. The morning after her confession, I woke up on the couch with a stiff neck and a heavier heart. The sunlight poured in through the blinds, illuminating the mess of our home, a coffee mug left on the table, her shoes kicked off carelessly in the entryway. It all felt suffocating. Everything seemed so normal on the surface, yet her words from the night before clung to me like a shadow. She moved around the kitchen, humming softly as if nothing had happened. Watching her act so indifferent made my stomach churn. I wanted to confront her, to force her to acknowledge what she had said, but I stayed silent. The truth was I was terrified of the answer. If I peeled back the layers, how much worse would it get? Instead, I retreated inward, letting my mind wander over the years of our marriage. I thought back to the early days, when we could not keep our hands off each other, when every small moment together felt electric. I tried to pinpoint where things had started to fade, but the decline had been so gradual, so insidious, that I had not noticed it at the time. There had been signs, though, hadn't there? Times when her touch felt perfunctory, her laughter forced, the nights she stayed late at work or buried herself in her phone, claiming exhaustion when I reached out to her. I had told myself it was just the ebb and flow of a long-term relationship, that we were like any other couple navigating the grind of daily life. But now I wondered, had I been blind, or had I chosen not to see? The hardest part was realizing how much of our life together had been performative. To the outside world, we were the perfect couple. Our friends envied our stability, our families praised our compatibility. At gatherings, we played our roles flawlessly, exchanging knowing smiles and inside jokes as if we were still madly in love. But behind closed doors, things were different. The little gestures that once came naturally, holding hands, spontaneous kisses, even genuine conversations, had become rare. We moved through life side by side, but never really together, like actors going through the motions of a script we no longer believed in. There were moments when I tried to bridge the gap. I booked weekend getaways, bought her flowers for no reason, even suggested we see a counselor. She always accepted these efforts with a polite smile, but her enthusiasm never lasted. It was like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much I poured in, it was never enough. Looking back, I realized how much I had sacrificed to keep up appearances. I had swallowed my own dissatisfaction, ignored my own needs, and convinced myself that this was just what marriage was: compromise, patience, endurance. I had spent so much energy trying to make her happy that I had not stopped to ask if I was happy. And yet, despite everything, I had stayed. Not just because of love, though I told myself that was the reason, but because I was afraid. Afraid of starting over, of admitting failure, of losing the identity I had built around being her husband. Our marriage was not just a relationship, it was a structure, a foundation on which I had built my entire adult life. To tear it down would mean questioning everything I thought I knew about myself. That morning, as she sipped her coffee and scrolled through her phone, I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. I was not just grieving the loss of her desire, I was grieving the realization that our life together was a carefully constructed illusion. I had been living in a house of cards, and with one drunken confession she had blown it all down. The worst part? I still was not sure what to do about it. So I did what I always did. I buried the pain, put on a brave face, and pretended. I smiled when she spoke, nodded when she asked me about plans for the week, and made small talk about the weather. But deep down I knew something had shifted. The weight of our shared charade had become unbearable, and for the first time I began to wonder if I could keep carrying it. The days after her confession felt like walking through quicksand. Every step, every conversation, every mundane interaction dragged me deeper into a suffocating realization. I could not stay in this marriage. Not like this. But leaving was not as simple as packing a bag and walking out the door. There was too much at stake. Our shared finances, the house, the years we had spent building a life together. I needed a plan, and it had to be airtight. The first step was research. Late at night, when she was asleep upstairs, I sat in the dim glow of my laptop, Googling everything from how to leave a toxic marriage to legal steps for divorce. It felt surreal typing those words into the search bar, but I knew I could not act on impulse. Every decision had to be deliberate. Finances were the biggest hurdle. Our accounts were joint, which meant every dollar I spent or moved would be noticed. I opened a separate bank account under a new email address, one she would not know to check. I started small, transferring insignificant amounts here and there, money she would not question if she even noticed it was missing. It was not much, but it was a start. Next came the legal aspect. I did not know much about divorce law, so I reached out to a friend who had been through it. I did not give him details, just said I was considering some changes and needed advice. He recommended a lawyer who specialized in cases like mine, discreet and efficient. Setting up that consultation felt like crossing a line I could never uncross, but I knew it was necessary. The hardest part was pretending nothing was happening. I still had to play my role, the attentive husband, the supportive partner. Every morning I got up, made her coffee, and listened to her talk about her day. Every evening I sat beside her on the couch, nodding along to whatever show she was watching. It felt like being a character in a play I had grown to hate, but any slip-up could unravel everything. There were close calls, moments when I thought she might suspect something. Once she picked up my phone and noticed an unfamiliar email notification. "What's this?" she asked, her tone sharp. My heart raced, but I shrugged it off, saying it was spam and deleting it before she could read more. Another time she asked why I'd been so quiet lately. I told her I was stressed about work, which was not entirely a lie. In the meantime, I started to imagine my life after her. It was not easy. The thought of being alone, of starting over from scratch, was daunting, but it was also freeing. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to think about what I wanted, not what would make her happy, not what would keep the peace, but what would give me a chance to feel alive again. I began organizing my personal belongings. Nothing obvious, just small things I could pack away without raising suspicion. Old photos, important documents, items with sentimental value. Each item felt like a piece of the puzzle, a step closer to reclaiming myself. The most painful part was deciding when to go. Timing was everything. I could not leave during a fight that would only give her leverage. I needed to wait for a moment of calm, a time when she would not see it coming. But as the days turned into weeks, the weight of the secret grew heavier. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had the strength to follow through. And yet every time I doubted myself, I thought back to her confession. Those words, "I haven't desired you in years," played on a loop in my head, a constant reminder of why I was doing this. Staying was not an option. Pretending was not an option. So I kept planning, kept preparing, kept moving forward in secret, because when the time came, I wanted to be ready to walk away, ready to rebuild, ready to finally live a life that was mine. As the pieces of my escape plan slowly fell into place, I found myself grappling with an unexpected and insidious enemy, doubt. It crept in during the quiet moments, while brushing my teeth, driving to work, or sitting across from her at dinner. Even as I inched closer to freedom, the fear of losing everything I knew clawed at the edges of my resolve. Our life, flawed as it was, had become a cocoon of routine. The familiarity of it all, the shared morning rituals, the unspoken understanding of each other's habits, the quiet nights watching TV, felt both comforting and stifling. I wondered if walking away would strip me of the only identity I had ever known as an adult, her husband. Then there was the guilt. Despite her confession, despite the cracks in our relationship that had long since widened into canyons, I could not ignore the years we had shared, the anniversaries, the road trips, the inside jokes. Those memories lingered like ghosts, haunting every decision I made. Was I being selfish? Was I throwing away something that, with enough effort, could be salvaged? One night we were sitting at the dining table, eating overcooked pasta and drinking cheap red wine. She was scrolling through her phone, absently commenting on a meme she had found funny. It was such an ordinary moment, but something about it struck me hard. This was our life, a string of mundane, predictable interactions, and yet a part of me almost wanted to cling to it. Even unhappiness can feel safe when it is all you have known. But then there were the other moments, the ones that reminded me why I needed to leave. The way she dismissed me when I tried to talk about my day, the sharp tone she used when I forgot to do something trivial, the nights I lay awake feeling the emptiness between us like a physical chasm. Those moments felt like small deaths, each one chipping away at who I was until I barely recognized myself. I started to realize that the comfort I felt was not real. It was an illusion. The life we had built together was a house of cards, and I had been too afraid to knock it down. But fear alone was not enough to keep me there. I had to remind myself of that every day. To combat the doubt, I forced myself to focus on the future. I imagined a life where I was not walking on eggshells, where I did not feel like an afterthought in my own marriage. I thought about the things I had given up over the years, the hobbies I abandoned, the friendships I let fade, the dreams I had put on hold for the sake of keeping her happy. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to dream again, to think about what I wanted. But the ghosts of comfort were not just emotional, they were practical too. Leaving meant uprooting everything, finding a new place to live, rebuilding my finances, explaining myself to friends and family who thought we were the perfect couple. It meant facing the judgment, the questions, the whispers behind my back. I knew people would ask, why did he leave? What really happened? And the answers were not simple. Some nights I almost convinced myself to stay. I told myself it was easier to keep pretending, to settle for the life I had instead of risking everything for the unknown. But deep down, I knew better. Staying was not a compromise, it was a surrender, and I was not ready to give up on myself. The hardest part was facing her. Every interaction felt like a test, every conversation a reminder of the fragile balance I was trying to maintain. I wondered if she sensed my detachment, if she noticed the way I avoided her touch or how I hesitated before answering her questions. Sometimes I caught her looking at me, her brow furrowed as if she were trying to decipher something. But if she suspected anything, she did not say. In those moments, the weight of the plan, the doubts, and the comfort all pressed down on me. It would have been so easy to give in, to let the fear of change paralyze me. But I could not let it. I could not let myself be trapped by a life that no longer felt like mine. So I kept moving forward, one step at a time. Even as the ghosts of comfort whispered in my ear, I reminded myself of the truth. Leaving was not just about escaping her, it was about finding myself again. The turning point came on an otherwise uneventful Tuesday. She had left early for work, leaving me alone in the house. It was one of those rare, quiet mornings where the absence of her presence made everything feel lighter. As I sat at the kitchen table staring at the half-empty cup of coffee in front of me, I realized I could not keep waiting for the perfect moment to leave. If I wanted out, I had to start taking real steps, no more stalling, no more second-guessing. The first thing I did was call the lawyer I had been researching. It was a nerve-wracking conversation, but also strangely empowering. I explained my situation, omitting the emotional details, and focused on the practicalities, splitting assets, legal rights, what to expect. The lawyer was straightforward, walking me through the process with a calmness I desperately needed. By the end of the call, I felt something I had not in months: control. That sense of control, however, did not last long. Every decision, every small action I took to prepare, felt like walking a tightrope. One misstep and everything could unravel. I started organizing my documents, bank statements, property deeds, anything that would be relevant when the time came. I kept them hidden in a box in the garage, buried under old tools and forgotten junk. It felt risky, almost reckless, but I could not afford to leave anything behind. The next challenge was finding a place to go. Staying with friends or family was not an option. I could not handle the barrage of questions, the pitying looks, or the unsolicited advice. I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere I could rebuild without interference. I started looking at apartments online, saving listings in a private folder. Most were out of my budget, but I did not care. I just needed one good lead, one place to start over. All the while, I had to keep up appearances. That meant laughing at her jokes, pretending to care about her endless rants about coworkers, and feigning interest in plans for the weekend. It was exhausting, playing the part of the dutiful husband while secretly dismantling the life we had built together. Every smile felt like a lie, every I love you a betrayal, not of her but of myself. One night, as we sat in the living room, she asked me a question that nearly derailed everything. "Are you happy?" Her tone was casual, almost offhanded, but the question hit me like a punch to the chest. For a moment I froze, the truth teetering on the edge of my tongue, but I caught myself and forced a smile. "Of course," I said. "Why wouldn't I be?" She did not press further, but her eyes lingered on me for a moment too long. I wondered if she suspected something, if the cracks in my facade were starting to show. That possibility terrified me, but it also pushed me forward. I could not afford to hesitate. I had to stay focused. Over the next few weeks, I started taking small items out of the house. A book here, a framed photo there. Things that would not be missed right away. I stored them in my car, hidden in the trunk, ready to go when the time came. Each item felt like a tiny victory, a piece of my life reclaimed. But the hardest part was waiting. Every day felt like walking on a minefield, never knowing if the next step would set everything off. I was hyper-aware of her moods, her reactions, her habits. Any change in her routine felt like a potential threat. If she became suspicious, if she confronted me before I was ready, the entire plan could fall apart. There were moments of doubt, moments where I questioned if I was doing the right thing. But those moments were fleeting. The more I planned, the more I prepared, the more I realized I could not stay. I had spent years sacrificing my happiness for the sake of maintaining a relationship that had become hollow. It was time to put myself first. As the days turned into weeks, the pieces of my plan began to fall into place. The lawyer had the paperwork ready. I had found a small, modest apartment on the other side of town, nothing fancy, but it was mine. My escape was no longer a distant idea. It was a reality waiting to happen. All that was left was to choose the right moment to make my move. The moment I had been planning for finally arrived, though not in the way I had envisioned. There was no dramatic fight, no explosive argument. It was a quiet, unassuming Tuesday, a day like any other. She had gone to meet some friends for drinks, leaving me alone in the house. As soon as I heard her car pull out of the driveway, I knew this was it. I walked through the house one last time. My footsteps echoed against the walls. The place felt eerily still, like it was already a memory. The photos on the walls, the furniture we had picked out together, The little knickknacks that had seemed so important at the time, they all felt like relics of a life that no longer belonged to me. I had packed most of my things the night before, loading them into my car under the cover of darkness. Now I grabbed the last of it, a duffel bag filled with clothes, the box of documents from the garage, and a few personal items I could not bear to leave behind. With every step toward the door, my heart raced, even though I knew she would not be home for hours. The fear of being caught lingered in the back of my mind. As I closed the door behind me, I felt an unexpected pang of sadness. This had been my home for years, a place where I had laughed, cried, and built what I thought was a future. Leaving it felt like closing the door on more than just a house. It felt like saying goodbye to a part of myself. But that sadness was quickly overshadowed by a sense of relief, like a weight I had been carrying for years had finally been lifted. I drove to my new apartment in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound breaking the stillness. When I arrived, I unloaded my things one box at a time. The apartment was small, sparsely furnished, and smelled faintly of fresh paint. It was not much, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something I had not allowed myself to feel: hope. The first night alone was strange. The silence was deafening, and I kept waiting for her voice, her footsteps, the sound of her phone buzzing on the coffee table. But none of it came. Instead, I sat on the floor, since I did not have a couch yet, and let the reality of my new life sink in. I was not just free from her. I was free from the charade we had been living, free to figure out who I was outside of that relationship. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I had not felt in years. There was no one to please, no one to tiptoe around. The day was mine to fill as I pleased. It was a strange, exhilarating realization. I made coffee in a kitchen that did not yet feel like home and stood by the window, looking out at a view that was entirely new. It was not the life I had envisioned for myself when I first got married, but it was a life that felt full of possibility. Of course, the aftermath was not without its complications. When she came home and found me gone, she called me over and over again. I ignored the calls at first, letting them go to voicemail. When I finally answered, her voice was a mix of confusion, anger, and disbelief. "Where are you? What's going on?" she demanded. "I'm done," I said simply. "I can't do this anymore." There was silence on the other end, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. But then she spoke, her voice quieter this time. "So that's it?" "Yes," I replied, "that's it." The conversation did not last long. There were no tears, no pleading, no dramatic declarations. Just a cold, mutual understanding that we had reached the end. She did not fight me on it, and for that I was grateful. It was as if she had known this day would come, just as I had. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding. It was not easy. I had to confront the parts of myself I had ignored for so long, the dreams I had abandoned, the person I had become. But with each passing day, I felt stronger, more grounded, more like myself. Freedom was not a sudden rush of euphoria. It was a slow, steady unfolding of possibilities. It was in the little things, the quiet mornings, the books I finally had time to read, the friends I reconnected with. It was in the realization that I did not need anyone else's approval or validation to feel whole. Leaving was not the end of my story. It was the beginning. And for the first time in years, I was ready to write it. For the first few weeks after I walked out, I kept waiting for the crash, the crushing wave of regret, the panic of having burned my entire adult life to the ground. It never came. Instead, what arrived was silence, so complete, so pure, that it felt almost sacred. No more bracing for the next dismissive comment. No more scanning her face for signs of the storm that was about to break. No more lying awake wondering if tonight would be another night of sleeping with a canyon between us. Just silence. And in that silence, for the first time in years, I could hear myself again. People think freedom feels like fireworks. It doesn't. It feels like the moment after you've been holding your breath underwater for far too long and you finally break the surface. The first gulp of air is ragged, almost painful, but then the second breath comes easier, and the third, and suddenly you remember what it's like to be alive in your own body. I still catch myself sometimes, standing in the grocery aisle, reaching for two of something instead of one, or turning to tell her a stupid joke I just thought of. The reflex dies a little more each time. The ache is still there, but it's no longer a wound. It's a scar, proof that I survived loving someone who had stopped loving me back long before she ever said the words out loud. I'm not angry anymore. Anger would mean she still has power. What I feel now is closer to pity, and even that is fading. She gave me the cruelest gift anyone ever handed me, the truth at maximum volume. Most people spend decades pretending, medicating, negotiating with themselves just to avoid hearing it. She ripped the bandage off in one drunken sentence. It hurt like hell, but it also cauterized the wound. There was no slow bleed left to manage. I'm 35, and I have never felt younger. My mornings belong to me. My evenings belong to me. The space in my bed is mine alone, and for the first time that feels like abundance instead of loneliness. I laugh louder now, real laughs that start in my belly and surprise even me. I say yes to things I used to say no to out of fear of rocking the boat. I say no to things I used to force myself to endure just to keep the peace. I am not the man who sat frozen in that corner while his wife announced she hadn't desired him in years. That man died quietly that night, suffocated by a love that had turned into performance art. The man who replaced him is quieter in some ways, louder in others. He knows exactly what he will never tolerate again. He knows the difference between solitude and loneliness. He knows that desire isn't something you beg for. It's something you become worthy of by refusing to settle for crumbs. Sometimes, in the new apartment, I stand on the tiny balcony at 2 a.m. with a glass of whiskey and look out at a city that doesn't know my old story. And I smile. Not because the pain is gone, but because I walked through it and came out the other side carrying only what was mine to begin with. My name, my worth, my future. I am not healed. I am whole. And that, I have learned, is infinitely better.